Hi folks, as promised, next tutorial is the start of the process of going through and getting the car from Blender into Trackmania and what you have to do that. I just changed this to vertex because I likes me vertex rather than increment. This is the car that I started with. It's straight from Lightwave, this one. The geometry isn't wonderful for working with, so basically I took this and removed the spoiler here and did a bit of a clean up and ended up with this particular one. So, the reason I removed the spoiler is simply it was a bit problematic to unwrap. I didn't want to be mucking about with unwraps. I thought if I get rid of the spoiler, you still learn what you need to learn without worrying about sort of complicated UV mapping. Right, now as it stands you can see the UV map is something of a mess, and if I just remap it again, it'll just take the bog standard mapping based on the current selection. So I can see from that straight away that you would have to do some work, and the first thing to do actually is I'll create myself a new UV image and call that details UV, because it's going to be the main UV map. I'm going to make it 2K image. My understanding is Trackmania can go up to 4K images for textures. 2K is probably good enough to get a decent texture without sort of blurring, but without being too heavy on memory. At this point you could also create a second image of the same size and call that skin UV, because one of the very first things you do when you've got this is you actually separate the car's bodywork from the actual details. Now the bodywork basically is the skin, so I'll hide that, and anything else you deem to be something you want to be able to edit within Trackmania in terms of treating it as the skin. Personally I just isolated those body panels, and I didn't mean to do that, but never mind. Alt H, actually I'll separate that by selection as well, why not? That's not what I intended to do. I intended to hide it, but that's fine. I'll just hide that, select that, join them. Right, so that's my skin, which is my body panels and my skin. Right, I'll come out of that, alt hide everything. That's not what I want the skin. Right, go into local mode. Right, so the first thing here is I can see that I've got seams that aren't really that useful, so if I select everything and unwrap that, you can see basically all around each window it's separating just the sort of sections there. So what I'll do here, first thing I'll do in the mesh display, I'll hide sharp bevel at creases, so I'm only looking at seams. Then in face mode I'll actually select these edge loops, or rather I should say these quad loops. So I shift click that. No, not you. Don't want you. Want you. Thank you. And you. Right, and do select boundary loop, which is my hotkey, and then Control E, clear seam. I'll select the back. Alt select, no, go back into face mode, Alt select, boundary loop, clear seam. Right, now I'll do an A8, symmetrize, so copy the clear seams over to the other side. Right, now I want to actually put in the seams I think would be more relevant, which would probably be in the corners of the work. So again, working on one side only, I can do mark seam, mark seam. I'll get rid of that manipulator, can see easier there. Select that, shift select that, shift select that, mark them as seam, select that, shift select that, not that one, that one, shift select that, and I'll tell you what, we'll shift select that one, mark them as seam, and then the two edges of the rear window, select them, mark that as seam, select everything, symmetrize. Right, so if I do an A8 right now, that's a bit better. There are my two panels and here's my body. So now it's just a question of choosing what sort of seams I'm going to split up. And I think I'm going to have that one, and I'm going to have that one. I'm going to come down there. There. I'll mark them as seams first. I'll just select a seam there to zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. And just mark that as a seam. I'll zoom them out a bit. Then just mark them as a seam. Right, so now just the boot to worry about. Or trunk, if you're American, I suppose. I'm English, so it's boot. Right. And you can see why I got rid of the spoiler. I'll just say, okay, have that as a seam. And I think I will have... Well, let's see what that doesn't actually... I'll take that as a seam. And maybe that as a seam. We'll see how that looks. Select everything, symmetrize it, select everything and wrap it. Yeah, that works for me. So this is my skin UV map. Basically your bodywork has one UV map, everything else has another. That includes your glass and your lights and your wheels. You can separate your wheels out into their own UV map if you so wish. In this instance I've not, but I have done both. So you can do that. So what I'll do now is I'll just select that, get everything, rotate that 90, get that roughly there, so there's my bonnet. Rotate that 90, move that over here. That's my boot. Just pull that in a bit actually. Then I'm gonna rotate that minus 90, move that there. No, I'm going to move that up there actually. Oh, 90, move that. Oh, 90, and move that. We've got plenty of space for everything else there. So then you could just select all of that, doing Control L, just scale that ever so slightly to give us a bit more space to play with the skin, like that. you know what, I think I'm gonna rotate that 90 and I'm just gonna put it over here. I'll just select them and just rotate them 90 back again. Stick them over there. Seeing as we've got the real estate to do it, seems daft to try and bunch them in the corner. Okie doke. What I might do, just, oops. If I do a B, just, yeah, the more or less level. I can do a Control L on that. B, Control L. Just GY, move that down ever so slightly. Or what I can do is GX, line it up, just move it along, get it level with that, and then just do a GX and push it out. Same with that. Select everything. Get that level with the top of the roof. GX, move that out. There we go. And that basically means then if I draw a line in the paint program or in texture paint, then it'll match the bonnet, the boot, and the top of the roof. So that's just why I've done that. So that's effectively your skin UV done and dusted. Then A to select everything, UVs, export UV layout. I always take the fill opacity to 0, so it's a pure wireframe. And we can stick this somewhere. Go into temp, and we can call that skin UV. Let's export that. So that's basically your skin's done in terms of setting out the UVs. So you can come out of edit mode for that, come back in out of local mode. And what I'll do there is, while I'm at it, I'll rename the object, and I shall rename that to S-body, which is what it needs to be called in Trackmania for the skin. So S-body is your skin, so we can hide that. Right. Now everything else has to be UV mapped en masse. So go into edit and again go through exactly the same process. Lay out your seams and everything. One thing I will say before I do that though is I would be inclined to select just one wheel. So I select that, do a Control L, select that, do a Control L. Make sure you've got all of that selected, that there's nothing left unselected, like that for example. So you can do Control L. So right, that's all of the wheel selected. I would hide that. Then I would basically Shift G, select material, select part of the hub, Shift G, select material, and delete the vertices. Unhide the one remaining wheel. The reason for that is pretty simple. Why bother trying to line up and UV map 4 wheels when you can do one? Then when you finish your UV mapping, duplicate your wheel, it'll honour the same UV map space, thereby saving yourself some work, rather than either duplicating the texture painting process or moving around all your UVs so they all line up in the same place. So that is the way I personally tend to work. So you set up your UV map, unwrap that, Control P just to pack it the best it can, and again if there are any questionable points on the UV map, you adjust them like this here again. That's obviously got a seam around both edges of wherever that is, and if you can't figure out where that is, what I would suggest you do is to go into this mode, set your face, and then set the in sync. And so if I A to deselect that, then I select these, go into this view and do the full stop. That tells me where they are, because it's actually highlighted them within the editor. So if I click on that, yep, that proves that that's where the issue is. So again, I would do Shift tilde, then Control E, I would clear the seam, and then what you can do is go into seam mode here, select those seams, and within here do a Control E and you can mark the seam. So that's really handy here, where I can go, I can select all of that, say, we'll select all of that, do a Control E and clear seam, then I can do it here. I can do Control E and mark seam. So now if I select everything here and do U, then those two have disappeared. And so again, you can do the same thing. Go into seam mode, Alt thing, do Control E, clear seam, zoom into it, select those seams, Control E and mark seam, go there, select everything, unwrap, and so on and so forth, and basically just go through the whole process and tidy up your UV map as you see fit. Right, now that's a long process. I'm not going to go through every bit of it because basically it takes time. So that done, what I will do is I will open up, as they say, one I prepared area. So if we go into here, oh you cow. So, thank you. So here we have one I've done prior, and there's my UV setup for this particular iteration of the model. That's the skin. And that's the UV map for the details. So that's basically, I've just gone through doing what I was just doing with that one example and sorted everything out. Then I've moved things around and tidied it up. Where I can, I've used follow active quads to get a tidier layout. And that's my UV map. And in fact, I'll tell you what, speaking of that, if we just grab this, I'll do a Shift G, material, just jump through the process again. If we just take this particular example, right, we hide everything else, right, and we unwrap that, I can show you basically how I go about that, because as it stands that's not very nice for unwrapping, for texturing. So what I do, I've figured out that for follow active quads to work, it's quirky. If I just select that, do an L, then U, follow active quads, you can see it's all strange. So I'll take that one, do an L, U, follow active quads. No difference. That's odd, isn't it? So I unwrap, then I follow active quads, and it does it differently. So in other words, first things first, simply reselecting another polygon and saying follow active quads has no effect. You've basically got to unwrap it in another method before you can then reselect follow active quads, and as you can see it's changing. Now I've found the thing that works the best is if you go into cubic mode first. Oh, and with follow active quads you have to select a quad first, then select everything else. So I would then go cube projection, follow active quads, and there you are. There's my tire. That's much better. So I can just select everything, push it over to one side so it doesn't upset the rest of the thing. Likewise with this, if I click that and click L and U, cube projection, U, follow active quads, that's not quite right. And it can be a bit hit and miss. Sometimes you may have to do it more than once to get the layout you want, and I've never been able to pinpoint why sometimes it works and why sometimes it doesn't. And you see that's a real mess. Or if I do cube projection and all of a sudden it works. It's obviously quirky, that it's got to be something to do with angles that it's working off, but I've never quite figured that out. But I found if I play around with which unwrap mode I select before going back to follow active quads, it's rare I can't get that sort of layout. So if I select that as well, then you can see now they're both very tidily UV unwrapped. Likewise, if I select that and I can unwrap, then cube projection and follow active quads, and again that comes out pretty well. So just bear that in mind when you are unwrapping your UVs and you're wanting to get nice straight lines. That's the way I would be inclined to go about it. If anyone knows of a better way, I'm all ears. Right, so I'm going to rename that to S-body because I've separated that, and so that is going to be D-body because that's the details. So D-body for your details, S-body for everything else. Now that we've unwrapped everything and we're happy with the unwrap and we have exported our UVs, then what we do now is we actually separate the glass and the wheels. So the glass is easy, just Shift G, Material, P, Separate by Selection. Boomf, that's your glass sorted. Likewise, select your material for your tyre, select your material for your rim, P for selection. Right, and believe it or not, you're a good chunk of the way now into being ready to go into Trackmania. Right, now as you can see on this one, as I said in previously, that any asymmetrical details have been added after I've done the most work. So once I'd unwrapped everything, including the things, I went into the steering wheel object by itself, unwrapped that before pulling it into here and then unwrapping the whole thing as a whole, just to ensure that everything is in its right place within the UV map. So that's that. Come out of that and we can unhide the body, and by and large that's what you need to get it ready to go into Trackmania. There really isn't much more to do. What I first do, obviously, is I'm going to make sure I've got enough wheels. Now again, I use a mirror to do this, so I select this. I've got a mirror function from an add-on. Select that, mirror, and that's added a mirror and copied it across based on the axis of this. Alternatively, you could have just used a mirror and copied it across based on the cursor. So I'll do a Shift D, Y, pull that back there, go into 3, and just GY, just to get that roughly where I want it, and select that, Control J to join them, and then I want to apply my mirror modifier. I could click there, or if you do Alt C and do Mesh from Curve, it basically collapses your modifiers. So that's another way of doing it. So now you've got all your wheels, and if I go into there, select everything, you can see that all the wheels occupy the same UV area, which is what we wanted. Right, so now I go into wireframe mode, go into top view, dot so I can see everything. Deselect everything, go into box mode, select, P, selection, B, select, B, selection, B, select, B, selection. Right, wheels done. That quick. Z2, back out, and back out of edit mode. Right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to name said wheels. So this one is D front right wheel. That one is D front left wheel. That one is D rear left wheel. And that one is D rear right wheel. That is actually the glass, so that is G body for glass body. So now if we look at what we have a skin, we have a glass, we have a details, and then we have our wheels. Now the next thing we need to do is make sure that the pivot point of the wheels is in the wheel. Now depending on how you've modelled your wheel or where you've got your car from, that can be as simple as assigning the pivot point to the geometry. If it isn't, what you can do is you can do that. You can take your cursor to selection, come out, and then put your origin to cursor. Again, I've got an add-on which makes that easy. I can do a Shift S within edit mode, and I can choose origin to selection. And that basically does all of that for me as a script. So again, go into edit mode, select that, Shift S, 7. Select that, go into edit mode, L, Shift S, 7. Select that, go into edit mode, L, Shift S, 7. And so if I go into medium point now, you can see that my wheels have the rotational point about their center. My body, my glass, and my details all have the origin point at the origin, which is where they need to be. They do not you do not have the origin of the geometry in the geometry. You have it at 0, 0, 0. That is absolutely critical for working in Trackmania. If by accident you forget to assign the origin of this, it becomes very obvious when you go into Trackmania to test your model, because basically what will happen is the wheel will rotate about the whole car. So for example, if I set that and I do an R on the X there, then that's basically what it should do. However, if you've accidentally forgotten to set that, and your origin is there, then this is what you see in Trackmania. So it's very obvious if you've got your pivot point wrong for your wheels. Right, so that's basically it in terms of separating the car. That's all there is to it. The next thing really is just setting up your materials. Now, for mine, I've got various setups like this, and they're all set up just to basically give me some sort of look. It's nothing fancy, it's just a basic look. And so once you've done that, what you need to do is bake those materials to your UV map. So what I do is, first of all, make sure you've got the relevant UV maps. I'm using the hotkeys here, by the way. I've just realised I've turned off the those keys. That needs to come up. There we go. I use hotkeys. I know that Shift F10 gives me that. Gives me the image editor. I know Shift F3 gives me my nodes, and Shift F5 gives me my 3D view. And I've burned those three into my brain, so I can just bounce between them as quickly as I need to. Likewise, the control up arrow to bounce in and out of, giving myself more space to play with. Right, I digress. So I've got my depths image and my skin image. And so what I do here, I'll go into my node editor for every material, add texture, add an image texture, and for every material on my details, then I assign that as my details one. So that's my details UVMap image. So I'll just do a Control C there, go in, click, Control V, go in, click, Control V. Oh, that's not using nodes by the look of it. Boom. Okay, Control V. Are you using nodes? No, use nodes. Control V. I'll just put this up a bit so I can see if it's using nodes or not. Click, Control V, click, Control V, click, Control V, and so on and so on and so on until you've got them all set up for baking, which once again I've done here with this. So as you can see, if I select that, oh, didn't want that. I select them, you can see they're set up for that. The bodywork is set up for the skin UV image. If I just hide the bodywork, the glass is set up for the details, because remember, of course, the glass is part of the details UV map. And then you've got all your details. And again, each one of these I've set up to burn to the... What you see in here actually is the result of my bake. But basically, once I've done all of them, I'll select that floor, do a Control I to select everything else, go over, go down, and I'll say bake my diffuse colour. And that will effectively bake out these colours here. Then once that's completed, and I've saved that as my diffuse colours, so in this instance, say I would save that as a PNG, and you could say that as diffuse depths, and then this one you could save out as diffuse skin. I would then come along and I would actually then bake the glossy colour. So if I just do that now quickly, no, yeah, I don't want the light plane. Oh, let me disconnect those. I don't want you. Okay, try again if you don't mind. And that basically carries on and bakes out your specular, which you need as the alpha of your colour when you're exporting your textures to Trackmania. So make sure you save this differently and you don't accidentally overwrite your colour image. So with this, again, you would call this depths spec and save you one as skin spec, so you keep them separate. And where are we? So here we go. You can see there that I've got, this is my original details, just basic colour from doing the bake. That is an edited one. I actually did most of this in Blender. I'll go over that in not too short a time. And then basically I ended up recreating my specular from my details and just basically dulling it down, making it grayscale and making sure all the parts I didn't want too much gloss in were suitably black. Likewise, my original skin, little bit of detailing done in Blender Texture Paint, and again the specularity, I just turned it into the grayscale and mucked about with the levels. So that gives me everything I need to play with, because within Trackmania you also need a details illumination, but we can build that from the straightforward details map, and again I'll go into that when we're dealing with the actual texture side of things. So there we are, that's everything baked. Nothing too fancy. Now what you can do then, if you've a mind to, is you can delete all of your surfaces off everything, and you can just have a single surface per one. I mean, this is probably more complex than it needs to be perfectly honest. In fact, I'm not even convinced you need any of this at all. I may test that out at some point, but I've just left it on simply because I can look at it within Blender. In fact, let me just have a quick, let me get my final one. Yeah, I've just used the same one for the final one. Right, so this is basically just using bog standard UV mapping, and if you look at the various objects, you can see D wheel, G body, S body, D body. There are no other materials on it, it only needs the one, because basically Trackmania doesn't care about materials coming from Blender, because all it's interested in is have you UV mapped it correctly, do your texture maps line up with your UV maps. That's it, that's all it's interested in. Right, so here we are, there's my car with the textures on that I've done within Texture Paint. And I'm going to stop this video there because I'm desperate for a cup of coffee, and in the next section we'll actually take a car with the basic UV baked images, and we will start using Texture Paint to show you how I can go about getting something like that, where you're basically setting it up to give it some sort of semblance of reality, or at least make it a bit more interesting than flat colours. And all of this, I will add, was all done within Blender. I didn't use GIMP or anything else. This was done in Blender using Texture Paint and just using, basically just using the stencil with a texture, and I'll go over that, as I say, in the very next section. So hopefully that was useful, and I didn't go too quickly and miss any points out. If I did, please let me know, I can always cover them again. Right,